Hello, and welcome to the June edition of the Centerville, Iowa Memories Podcast. I'm Lucas Eddy, and with me is Lisa Eddy. Today, we are introducing a new series that we will visit every so often. It's called our Appanoose County's Extraordinary Individuals series. Today, we'll start the series by visiting the life of hugely successful Hollywood literary agent H.N. Swanson. So, Lisa, could you give us an explanation of who H.N. Swanson was?
Thanks, Luke. Yes, I can tell you that H.N. Swanson was a literary agent, meaning that he represented many famous writers and many written works, and then they became successful movies later. So he's not a household name, but he is an agent behind a writer who was behind a story that was behind a movie. So he was several steps down the chain, but he was wildly successful at what he did.
So, Lisa, we did just unveil a new exhibit during Iowa Museums Week at the Appanoose County Historical and Coal Mining Museum about H.N. Swanson. So how did that come about?
Yes, we were contacted by Swanson's stepson, Thomas Shanks. He offered to send us some H.N. Swanson pieces, correspondence, photographs, books, and more information. We had always had a small amount about Swanson in the museum, but all of this information allowed us to create a larger exhibit more worthy of his story.
So let's talk a little bit about the beginnings of H.N. Swanson. He was born right here in Centerville in 1899 to Swedish immigrants. His father was a local tailor by the name of Swan P. Swanson. He went to Centerville schools and graduated in 1917. Local papers show that he was involved with lots of drama projects, so he got his start early. He was always drawn to writers and was an avid reader.
Yes, that's correct. He went to Centerville High School and graduated, and then he continued his education by attending Grinnell College, and he graduated in 1922. And while he was in college, he had some leadership roles in some groups, and one of them was the staff of the Malteser, which was a publication that they created that was collegiate humor. It was just a comical sort of a book. And then after he graduated, he wrote his first book, Corn, Moods from Mid-America. And I believe it is a collection of funny stories from the Midwest. And we do have a copy of that in the exhibit.
It sounds like he got off to a running start. After college, he moved to Chicago and started a new magazine with some other folks called College Humor. He was the editor-in-chief from 1924 to 1932. The magazine showcased pieces by new writers and was really a success. He caught the interest of David O. Selznick of RKO Studios, who begged him to move to Hollywood and work for him. He wasn't sure, but he made the decision to make the move.
But think about what point in time this was. This is the early 20s. Movies were brand new, and most movies were still silent. They're just beginning to transition over to movies with audio or talkies. So he's getting in on the ground floor of this era. He became a producer at RKO and produced a few movies, meeting with the writers, actors, and executives at the studio. He was making connections that would come in handy later. He produced a few Wheeler and Woolsey comedies, as well as a few other comedies while working for RKO. They were nothing like the movies that we watch today, but they were state-of-the-art for that era. Just think about it. He was a young person living in what we would look back on as the Roaring '20s, and he was in Hollywood, living the high life. It reminds me of the lifestyle of the Great Gatsby.
But he didn't stick with RKO Studios all that long. During the time working at RKO, he realized that all of the screenwriters needed someone in their corner to negotiate their contracts for them. In time, Swanson decided to fill that need. He opened the H.N. Swanson Agency and began to take on clients. At one point in time, 110 writers worked for 20th Century Fox, and Swanson represented 80 of them.
He not only represented the screenwriters who worked for the studios, but then he started to represent authors who had written books that were suitable to be made into movies. Some of the authors that he represented were F. Scott Fitzgerald, Frank Buck, William Faulkner, Agatha Christie, Arthur Haley, James Cain, Paul Theroux, Joseph Wambaugh, Charles Bennett, Pearl Buck, Raymond Chandler, Elmore Leonard, John O'Hara, and there is a longer list that, of course, I can't list all of them here, but those were kind of the highlights.
And Swanson also represented books and authors that eventually turned into movies. And some of those movies were The Postman Always Rings Twice, Old Yeller, The Big Sleep, Butterfield 8, The Mosquito Coast, and Airport, which also, the movie Airport, has a connection to Appanoose County as well.
Yeah, the movie Airport, I don't think a lot of Centerville people know this, but it was based on the crash of Continental Flight 11 that happened over Centerville, Iowa, and then crashed over the line in Missouri. The movie Airport with Dean Martin, Jacqueline Bisset, Maureen Stapleton, George Kennedy, Burt Lancaster, filmed in 1970. That was loosely based on that crash. So that was actually, there's that connection. Arthur Haley read that story apparently in the news and created an entire movie, although the movie was a little kinder where everybody lived. Whereas in the actual crash of Continental Flight 11, everyone died. There were 45 that died that day.
And Haley and Swanson had success in that movie, and Swanson had success in other movies and books that he represented as well. And Lisa, could you tell us one of the more notable books or movies that Swanson represented?
So one of the things that H.N. Swanson actually considers as his greatest moment was when he was visited by F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wanted him to read through his newest book, and it was called Trimalchio at West Egg. At West Egg being a name of a town. And so Swanson read the book, thought it was absolutely fabulous, and he handed it back to F. Scott Fitzgerald and said, "You've got to change the name of it. I love this story. It would be so good, but you've got to change the name of it." And Fitzgerald was kind of surprised, and he said, "Well, what would you call it?" And Swanson replied, "Gatsby, the Great Gatsby." And of course, that story in that time frame was current. It was, back in the 20s and 30s. And so, whereas we look at, watch the movie or read the book, you look back on it as a movie in a different era, which it was, but when it was written, it was a current day story. So H.N. Swanson is very proud that he helped to name The Great Gatsby, and he considers that one of his greatest accomplishments. But he was friends with, he golfed with Clark Gable, and he was just friends with all of the Hollywood people. And one of the items that was donated to our new exhibit is a photograph of H.N. Swanson and probably, I'm guessing, about 10 other people in the photograph. And he was working at RKO Studios at the time. And amongst the people in that picture was Amelia Earhart. And so we're thrilled to have that in our exhibit. And so we'd like to invite y'all to come to the museum and see our new H.N. Swanson exhibit.
Alrighty, thank you for sharing all that information with us, Lisa. I believe that wraps up our Extraordinary Individuals series first episode, and we may be doing a few more of these in the future. And if any of you all come down to the Appanoose County Historical and Coal Mining Museum, you'll see we have, along with the H.N. Swanson exhibit, a exhibit for extraordinary individuals.